Hey guys, it's Chris at Highland Guitars. You're watching another one of my YouTube guitar building videos. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I hope that by the end of this video, I'll have earned the honor and privilege of your subscription. And of course, everybody who's watching, if you enjoy this video or get anything out of it, I would appreciate it if you would click that thumbs up button down below. It's a great way to show my channel's support without having to spend any money. But if you would like to help support the channel financially, you can visit my e-guitar plans website or my Highland Guitars merch store. There's links in the description below. And any purchase you make on those sites is going to help support this channel so that I can keep building guitars and making videos on the whole process of building guitars, as well as reviewing a lot of the tools and techniques that we use for building guitars. And if you want to keep it really simple, you can just click the thanks button down below and leave a tip in the amount you think is fair. What I wanted to talk about in today's video is I want to address a couple of viewer comments that have come up in recent weeks. And the first has to do with a favorite product of mine, and that is Sutherland Wells polymerized tung oil. And I've had a couple of questions on it. The first was, can you tint the oil so that you can apply color when finishing a guitar? And the answer is yes. I have tried a couple of different products that you can use to tint Sutherland Wells tung oil. One of them is trans tint dyes, and the other is Keta dyes. And both work, although they work in slightly different manner. And what it comes down to is, as I've said many times before, when it comes to finishes, especially finishes that you don't have experience with, or maybe combinations of finishes, as well as the type of wood you're finishing, you need to test on scrap. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to test. You can't watch a video like what I'm showing right here and explain a way of doing something and then do it in hopes that it's going to turn out exactly the same, because you may find in your situation the results may differ, or it may not look as good in real life as it did on camera. So it's really important to test all these different finishing products and techniques before you commit to your guitar. But I found that with Sutherland Wells polymerized tung oil, it mixes very well with trans tint. It mixes okay with Keta dyes, although I think with the Keta dyes, it depends on how much you mix in to the oil. It doesn't seem to be as intense as the trans tint. So, and the trans tint, when I mixed that up, it was just a few drops, and it produced very strong, intense color compared to the Keta dyes. Keta dyes, it wasn't quite as intense, and I really think Keta dyes is designed to be mixed into either water or denatured alcohol. That's where it really works extremely well as a very intense dye. But the advantage of using trans tint in polymerized tung oil is that once it's basically like creating an oil-based stain. Once you've applied it, you'll let it dry for about 12 hours or 24 hours for an even more complete dry. And that color is going to be bonded into the wood, because the oil, the polymerized tung oil, will act as a binder and will permanently bond that dye pigment into the wood so that it won't reactivate when you try to apply clear coats over the top of it. So you could mix your trans tint into the polymerized tung oil, apply it, let it dry for 12 to 24 hours. Then you could come back and apply just straight polymerized tung oil as your clear coats and build those up until you get the sheen that you want. And you don't have to worry about the dye becoming reactivated and working its way out of the wood onto the rag that you're using to apply the tung oil. And this is really useful, especially if you're going to be doing a burst type effect, where you might have one color in the center and then a different color around the perimeter, and you're trying to blend the two. Once it's dry, you want it to stay in the wood. You don't want to start applying additional coats of the oil over the top and reactivate that dye and cause it to work its way out of the wood and then mess up your transition from one color to the other. Okay, so that's it basically for the polymerized tung oil question. Now the next question that has come up in recent videos, I produced a video not too long ago where I talked about different factors in a guitar and how changing those factors can change the tone of a guitar. And what I focused on primarily was the pickups and the electronic controls. And then I also mentioned that the signal chain from the jack all the way to the speaker, all the elements in between can have an effect on the tone of the guitar. So if you build a guitar and you're not happy with the tone, you can change those elements to change the tone, to dial it into something that's a little bit more appealing to your ears. However, several viewers commented and mentioned that I had forgotten a couple of things. Well, I didn't really forget a couple of things. Instead, what I did and what I choose to do when I build a guitar is I look at the hierarchy of a component's effect on tone. And some components have a higher hierarchy. They do more if you change them than other parts do. For example, one viewer mentioned that I didn't bring up the subject of changing the strings. You can change the style, for example, from a round wound to a flat wound. You can also change the gauge of the strings, and that can affect the tone. However, I feel that that is lower on the list, the hierarchy list, than the other components like the pickups and the electronic controls, the potentiometers, the capacitors, all that kind of stuff. Changing strings will affect the tone to a very limited degree. The problem is, and this is something I found in my own experience, when building guitars for other people, if I suggest that they change the strings to change the tone, they're a bit hesitant to do that because they're accustomed to playing certain strings and they don't like the idea of switching, maybe going with a heavier gauge or switching from a round wound to a flat wound. It's too off-putting to them, so they don't like to do it. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't include that in that discussion. Now, another issue that another viewer brought up was pickup height. Why didn't I mention that you can adjust pickup height to dial in the tone? And the reason for that is because I mentioned pickups in general. And to me, swapping pickups or swapping the magnet also includes setting the pickup height once you reinstall them. So I don't feel it's that big of an issue to include that specifically. I mean, if I wanted to, I could really drill down into every aspect of a pickup's design and how those aspects can be changed to affect tone. But I didn't want to get into that much detail. Instead, I just wanted to discuss the pickups in general, just do an overview. So yes, changing the height of the pickups can affect tone, but I find that it is very minimal in its impact. So it's not one that needs to be highlighted and brought to the forefront when discussing the effect that pickups have on the tone of a guitar. Typically, I find when you change the height of the pickup, it really more affects the volume than it does the tone. Now, of course, there are going to be those of you out there who will argue that it definitely affects tone. Yes, it probably does, but like I said, the impact is much more, it's smaller, it's not as noticeable as swapping out the entire pickup itself or even just swapping out the magnet in the pickup. So I generally don't cover that. Now, there was one other issue that was mentioned, and I thought this was really interesting, and I kind of included it, but like the pickups, it was sort of bundled under the whole concept of the signal chain from the guitar to the speaker. So that would include the cable. any effects pedals that you're using, any effects rack systems that you're using, computers, software, all that kind of stuff, the design of the amplifier itself, and then the speaker. But there is one other component that you can add to the mix that can have an enormous effect on tone, and that's called an attenuator. Now, I don't want to get into too much detail about what an attenuator is, but in a nutshell, it goes between the speaker and the amplifier, and it sort of fools you into thinking that the volume has been turned all the way up on the amplifier, because as you know, especially with tube amps, when you crank that volume, especially on a higher wattage amplifier like a big Marshall head or a Mesa Boogie or anything like that, when you crank that volume on a tube amp, the tone changes and it can become very desirable, and we love the way it sounds. The problem is, if you're playing in your bedroom or you live in an apartment or you're in a small venue, cranking the volume isn't always possible to do without damaging your ears and upsetting all your neighbors. So one of the ways that you can simulate that is the addition of an attenuator that goes between the speaker and the amplifier. It fools the amp into thinking the speaker is drawing more power, when in truth what it does is it draws out all that power from the amplifier, but then instead of sending it to the speaker where you would get intensely loud volume, it bleeds off some of that signal, converts it to heat so that it dissipates, and then it leaves a little bit extra to go to the speaker so that you get your sound. But what you get is you get that high volume tone, but at a much lower volume level. So that's something else. I didn't include that in that video where I talked about changing components to change the tone, only because I considered it all part of that whole signal chain, and I make an assumption that everybody knows what that would involve. But I kind of think there are probably a lot of you out there who've never even heard of an attenuator and have no idea what it does. So you might want to Google it, do some research, and you may find that an attenuator might be a component that would fit perfectly into your amp and speaker setup so that you can get tone, the type of tone that you've been dreaming of, that you only hear when you crank that volume up when you're in a venue playing for other folks, and you have that ability to crank it up. But when you're in a studio or in the bedroom of your apartment, you may not be able to crank up the volume to the levels that are required to get that kind of tone. So I hope you found this video to be useful. Every so often I'll do videos where I'll talk about viewer comments and questions. So if so, please give it a thumbs up. Visit eGuitarPlans.com, Highline Guitars merch store, leave a tip. And until the next episode, as always, take care, stay safe, and I hope you'll be back for more future guitar building videos.